Welcome to Norse Code, the number one podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I'm your host, Dusty O'Connell. Coming up, we've got a fantastic Eagles preview episode with Arif Hassan, Vikings blogger extraordinaire. How you doing, Arif?
I'm good. How are you?
Excellent. I am well. And we've got a very special guest this week, someone that you know fairly well. But before we dive into that, want to highlight a little contest we're doing throughout this week. I'd say we'll probably wrap it up Monday before the recap podcast. So anyone who contributes in any dollar amount via the PayPal, we suggest about Tree Fitty, will be entered into a drawing to win one of 2 copies of the Pioneer Press with the big Vikings splash on it, the Monday edition, and 1 copy of the Monday edition of the Star Tribune. So feel free to throw a few bucks our way if you think our services are worthwhile, and also if you want a cool piece of Vikings memorabilia. Thank you to Stephen Adams, who writes in with his contribution. You had me at swag chance, you glorious bastards. There's a little heart icon. Aw, that's sweet. And also, William Edwards contributes about Tree Fitty. Includes a note. Started listening this season. Love your work, especially the weekly preview. Oh, well, you're gonna get a kick out of this one. Let me tell you. And we also have a new Patreon contributor this week. I had it here. I'm well organized right now.
Super prepared,
I know. Ben Flatguard joins the ranks of our monthly Patreon contributors, which you can do as well at patreon.com/NorseCode. And of course, the address to make a one-time contribution to the tip jar and get entered in the drawing to win some Vikings-related newsprint, some birdcage liner, is paypal.me/NorseCode. And thank you to everyone who's contributed in the past and will contribute in the future. You guys are the best. It helps a lot. Keeps the lights on and gives us maybe a McDouble every now and then. Hopefully we'll get over that 69 cents an hour hump with your generous contributions in this postseason. Now, on to the show. Joining us this week is Arif's long-suffering co-host, not quite as long as me, but still pretty long, long-suffering co-host at the Wide Left podcast. He's been on the show before to talk Eagles, and we busted him out of football podcast retirement just for this show. He's the one, the only, the Ben Natan. How you doing, Ben?
I'm doing well. I went outside for about 20 minutes today, and I've decided I'm not going to go outside for the rest of the week. So it's good.
Were there like zombies? Like, why aren't you? Like,
it's terrible.
Yeah, it's pretty bad over here too. Because New York's hitting 10 degrees or something like that.
It's like 10 degrees, but the thing that I think that's unique about a New York winter, is that the snow immediately turns to trash as it hits the ground. So we don't have white snow. It's just brown. It's like cold brown sludge that will get into every pore of your shoes and your like the lower parts of your pants. And then every avenue and street is its own special wind tunnel. And then you can't feel your face. It's a great city, best city in the world. And I absolutely hate it.
Well, it is 50 degrees and sunny in Denver, so I wouldn't know.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah, he lives in Denver, which I guess is having having a beautiful time.
We actually don't have enough snow.
The weather in Philly for the game shouldn't be that bad, with 40 degrees, I think, by the end of the game.
No, I think that's a little bit misleading because it said it's supposed to be 50 degrees by the start of the game, right? And it gets cold very quickly in the city, and it gets particularly cold in the stadium because the stadium also gets very, very windy as well. Like I was there on Saturday, and the game started out. It was about 45 degrees when it started out. I was like, oh yeah, this will be fairly good. And then by the end of the game, I couldn't feel my toes. So I think that the beginning forecast is a little bit misleading in terms of how the conditions are going to be.
Okay. Well, I'll talk about all that and more in a second. Dusty, is there anything you wanted to add before we get in?
I'm assembling the mailbag on the fly here. Kyle Slaby writes in, will Dusty O'Connell finally talk during an interview? I don't know, Kyle. Does this count? That's where I'm
All right.
at.
Your contribution counted. Great. Fantastic.
Woohoo, I did it. No, I'll be here.
All right. So Ben, who has already been introduced, writes for Bleeding Green Nation at SB Nation, talks a lot about the Eagles, longtime suffering Eagles fan, longtime suffering co-host of the Wide Left podcast, where we talk about not football, but politics. If you're interested in the political takes of Ben and I think we've kind of given away the game with the title of that podcast, the way that we lean. Be sure to subscribe to that on iTunes. In the meantime, we'll talk about Eagles football. Ben, what are your thoughts on the game against Atlanta? It was a slugfest.
I've never cried so much as an adult as I did at the end of that goal line stand. It was pretty unbelievable because I'm a pretty pessimistic person, which is not a surprise to anybody who's known me more than 5 minutes or 6 minutes. So I was pretty down on the chances for the Eagles going into that game because I was like, Atlanta has this really fast defense and this, really athletic and really talented offense. And, the Eagles have Nick Foles. But I remember I was driving to Philadelphia from my hometown, which is about 45 minutes outside of Philly. I was driving to Philadelphia that afternoon, and I was slowly starting to get confident about the game. And I was like, well, the defense, if the defense plays really well, and we run the ball a lot, and Jay had that really good game against the Falcons earlier in the year, and I was like, by the time the game started, I was like, all right, this game is going to be close, it's going to be a slugfest, but it was going to be close. And then it was the first play of the game was that pass interference on Torrey Smith, and it was a 60-yard advantage for the Eagles. And I was like, here we go. This is going to be great. Oh my God, we're going to do it. And then the next play, Jay Ajayi fumbled. And I was like, we're going to lose this game by so many points. And I actually turned to the random guy who was standing next to me during the game. I was like, this will be the entire game, this type of back and forth. And that's what it was. And it was really exciting. And after the game, I just felt intoxicated. Well, because I was a little bit actually intoxicated, but also I had been going to Eagles games since I was a very young child, and this was my first time ever seeing a playoff win at the Link live. So it was just really exciting experience. And I think it goes to show kind of the character of the team. To now talking actual football terms, this is a team that will not quit, and it's pretty inspiring to see them all kind of rally behind the head coach and rally behind the backup quarterback, Nick Foles, and say it's really terrible that Carson's not in this, but we can, this is still a talented football team, and they showed that against the Falcons. The defense played absolutely fantastic football. Of course, I think the Falcons kind of shot themselves in the foot a lot on offense, but ultimately, the run defense and the pass defense made just enough plays to slow down, Atlanta's passing offense. And then, the Eagles offense was pretty impressive given, what they were going up against and what they're working with. I think that, Doug called a very good game to kind of take the game a little bit out of Nick Foles' hands. And Nick Foles played a really solid second half too, which hopefully kind of translates or carries over into the game against Minnesota in terms of confidence.
Yeah, well, the way that you're describing the Eagles, and we kind of already know this, I think brings to mind the Vikings to Vikings fans. So there's a lot of connective tissue between the Eagles and the Vikings as they head into this game. A lot of people are very familiar with it, but Case Keenum, Nick Foles were on the same team with Jeff Fisher of the St. Louis Rams. Nick Foles, who previously, played for the Eagles at that point, was, I think, traded after a pretty poor 2014 showing, but a fantastic 2013 showing. And then after that, they moved to Los Angeles, and Case Keenum is backing up Jared Goff, and Nick Foles heads back to the Philadelphia Eagles, who is backing Carson Wentz, who's only there, or who's only starting because the Eagles traded Sam Bradford over to the Vikings, who then gets injured. And when the Vikings sign Case Keenum as a backup, they start him, et cetera, et cetera. People kind of know kind of the odd circumstances that have both Nick Foles and Case Keenum playing against each other.
Don't leave out the important fact that Jeff Fisher traded Sam Bradford to the Philadelphia Eagles.
Right, yeah, of course. That is awesome.
Right. Yeah, it's like also like a beautiful part of this amazing triangle and it's all Jeff Fisher. Like Jeff Fisher
Jeff Fisher's
is the Kevin Bacon of separation in the NFL.
Right, exactly, yeah. And so with all that, yeah, of course there's this strange connective tissue between the two teams, but they also feel very similar. I mean, you're describing a team that has overcome the loss of their starting quarterback, that's rallying around a really good defense, that has improved significantly both in run support and, most importantly, in pass defense, something that they struggled with in previous years. And now they're kind of carrying their backup quarterback. And the thing that gets me is that you talked about that very first play of the game, this pass interference deep, and it reminded me so much of what we've seen from Case Keenum the past 3 weeks, where it's this deep pass, it's underthrown by a lot in this case, but quite a significant amount, and it causes a pass interference penalty, and the Vikings and or the Eagles get to advance the ball really significantly. So it feels like you've got two teams that are very, very similar to each other, kind of duking it out. Now, I do think the Saints were a better team, but I think the Eagles are a more difficult team to kind of solve, at least when the Vikings are on offense. We'll talk about when the Vikings are on offense and the Eagles are on defense in a second, but that's kind of my feeling about it. So I think the most important factor for the Eagles in this game will be kind of what Nick Foles will see, who will see when Nick Foles decides to sling the ball and stuff like that. So I want you to talk a little bit about Nick Foles, and also it seems like there's this tendency. So Nick Foles has been passing under play action over a third of the time since he started for the Eagles, which is higher than any other quarterback has over the course of the season, including number 1 Jared Goff and number 2 Case Keenum. Do you think that the Eagles have really fully committed to this idea that Foles isn't going to be a driver of the offense, but is kind of a steward of the offense while the running game takes care of things?
Yeah, it's almost a little bit reminiscent of like the early Carson Wentz games back in 2016, where the offense was really kind of functioning around Carson Wentz, and Carson Wentz had to kind of go through the motions of the offense to succeed. And, as the season went along, they started asking him to do more and more stuff, and it was getting a little bit more complicated. But Doug does a really great job tailoring the offense to making it kind of function removed from the play of the quarterback. I think we saw that against the Falcons, where a lot of the plays, it was a lot of running plays, and then it was a lot of like pop passes and screens, really simple reads for Nick, and then occasionally taking the shot down the field. I think that one of Nick's strengths as a passer, as a backup too, is he's definitely not gun shy. He's a tough guy. He's willing to take shots down the field. He's willing to take heat in the pocket almost to a fault. I mean, he takes some really bad sacks. But they're willing to go down the field with him. But it's it's very obvious that the offense is kind of functioning. Functioning kind of without, kind of leaving him, as the backseat and kind of ask him to make really simple reads, and like stuff like the Torrey Smith pass. That's been like a weird kind of like, that's been a play on the offense all season, is like the shot down to Torrey Smith that is either going to be a touchdown or pass interference, or he's going to drop it. And that's probably something they're going to continue to do, because they want to just like establish that downfield throw for the sake of letting the defense know that they're willing to test that. And they showed that kind of all game against the Falcons. So, the Falcons, who have a very, very good pass defense. But ultimately, the game is going to function off of, what happens in the run game, what happens in the short game, and those down the field passes won't be happening, super often.
So the Vikings are on defense, the best defense that we've seen on third down since we've started tracking this statistic way back in 1991. And if you adjust it for league environment, it's actually even better, because offenses convert third down more now than they have in the past. The Eagles' defense also pretty good on third down, but my question is about the Eagles' offense against the Vikings' defense when we get to that third down situation. So what's really nice about a good running game is that it sets you up for third and manageable. The Vikings have a pretty good run defense. Maybe they have the ability to stop that. But, my question is, in those three situations, third and short, third and medium, and third and long, what are your worries about the offense, and how kind of related are they to Nick Foles?
I mean, third and long is easily the most frightening prospect. And field position also matters because I think that, Doug is willing to play, 4-down territory pretty early in terms of field position. I mean, once you cross the 50, that turns into 4-down territory for Doug Peterson, especially in these playoff games. But, if it's a third and long and you're putting a lot of pressure on the passing game, it's going to end up being a screen or a short pass to Nelson Aguilar. That's what it has been since Nick took over. And sometimes they've worked out really well. I mean, the Eagles screen offense has been really nice because of the athleticism of their offensive line and also, the pass catching ability of guys like Corey Clement, Jay Ajayi, Kenyon Barner. But, those third and shorts don't really worry me because the ability the team has shown to just kind of run the ball, in those, 3-yard, 4-yard situations. I mean, the offensive line has been mauling. I think that was, another thing that really helped them out against the Atlanta Falcons is guys like, Stefan Wisniewski and Brandon Brooks and Lane Johnson and Jason Kelsey were all just playing out of their minds. And that's really the lifeblood of the offense at this point. The offense is going to be running through the offensive line because it's about pounding the ball. It's about throwing those screen passes and making sure that those blocks are happening downfield. So, third and short, I'm not really worried about. Third and long, I mean, depending on where you are in the field, third and long can be a little bit of a worry because Nick has a tendency to hold on to the ball too long as well. And there was one time against the Falcons, I remember that they were on the 35-yard line in Falcons territory, and he took a 10-yard sack or something and knocked him out of field goal range. And that's something that he just cannot do. I mean, those points are unbelievably important against teams like the Falcons or teams like the Vikings, where the game is inevitably going to be low scoring. So hopefully they find a way to kind of avoid those situations. But yeah, third and long is really dangerous territory for the Eagles offense.
So you mentioned a couple of times Foles' capacity to, take on extra pressure and then sometimes take sacks by holding onto the ball too long. What are the other weaknesses from Foles that you're worried about, and what are the strengths that you see Doug Peterson taking advantage of?
I mean, this is kind of a general thing to say, but his weaknesses have been just kind of shoddy accuracy all over. I mean, he's really a hot and cold passer in it that he can make the right reads very often. He's pretty good at reading the field, but once the ball comes out, you don't exactly know where it's going to go. There was a couple passes. I mean, in that kind of infamous pass that bounced off of Keanu Neal's hands, into Torrey Smith's, that pass, he had Zach Ertz open over Keanu Neal. He had him open down the seam. That would have been, potentially a touchdown if he hit that throw. But he made the right read. It was just a terrible throw. And then he had another play where it was Nelson Aguilar was running a post from the slot and he had him wide open. And he just overthrew him. And that was a 40-yard gain that he missed out on. And that's been really a problem his whole career. He's a smart guy. He knows how to read the field and kind of see the, guys coming open, but he just doesn't really know how to throw guys. His anticipation is kind of mediocre. Even on that Torrey Smith pass, a better pass would have been a touchdown. Torrey Smith roasted, I think it might have been Robert Alford. He roasted the guy defending him, and he had to slow up to kind of get that pass interference. So, if Carson was throwing that, that would have been a touchdown, no problem. Because Nick Foles throws a lot more rainbows than you'd really want him to. He doesn't really throw that bullet pass, especially in those deep throws. In terms of strengths, like I said, I think he's a smart guy. He obviously knows the offense because of his experience, with Andy Reid and then also Doug Peterson in Kansas City and then now in Philadelphia. He knows the offense pretty well. And he's an aggressive guy. He's not going to turn into check down Charlie. He knows that he needs to target down the field if the offense is asking him to target down the field. So those are traits that help him. But he can, he's a little bit sporadic with his accuracy. And then of course there's a whole thing about taking bad sacks, and he has a tendency to backpedal a lot. He doesn't step up in the pocket enough. So I think that what's going to be really important for the offense is kind of creating this environment where you're running the ball really efficiently. You're creating these like 3-step drops where you're not asking them to hold on to the ball for too long to find guys open down the field. If you are going down the field, like make it like one of those, play action shot passes, like nothing where he has to hold on to the ball too long, because honestly, the longer he holds on to the ball, like the worse the outcome is inevitably going to be. Inevitably. Yeah, sorry.
All right. No worries. We'll talk about the running backs in a second. That's an interesting conversation. We'll talk about the receivers in a second. I'm a little bit scared of what might happen there. I want to talk about the offensive line right now. So Jason Kelce is maybe the best run blocking center in the NFL right now. Brandon Brooks, underrated. Lane Johnson, pretty good, I would say. And Stephen Wisniewski, who I always have thought of as a center throughout his whole life, so seeing him play guard is kind of weird. Has a lot of movement ability too. And then, last game, the commentators were willing to point out that Big V was doing well, but overall he's not been having a good year, replacing Jason Peters. Like you mentioned, it's a really athletic offensive line. Some players should be, recognized for that athleticism, like Brandon Brooks, and some players already are, like Lane Johnson. How do you think that offensive line matches up to the Vikings defensive line and also those linebackers, Eric Kendricks and Anthony Barr?
I think that this is easily the best front seven that they've had to face all year. And when I look at how they've fared, when they've gone up against really fast defenses, like their game against the Seahawks was kind of a mess. And that kind of scares me going into this game, because the Seahawks have a similar build in terms of, they like those big defensive tackles, those athletic edge rushers, those athletic linebackers, guys like KJ Wright and Bobby Wagner. It's not such a different mold than what you have in Eric Kendricks and Anthony Barr and guys like Everson Griffin and Danielle Hunter, Linval Joseph. So that worries me a bit, but at the same time, the way that the offensive line was able to elevate their game in the playoffs, against another team with that Seattle mold in terms of athleticism in the front seven with Atlanta, that's a little bit encouraging to me. And they didn't play a perfect game, especially in terms of pass defense, or pass blocking. Although I would say that Nick Foles has a tendency to make offensive lines look a little bit worse than they are. I think that, there's reason to be slightly more comfortable after last week's showing than maybe I would have felt if the Vikings were their first game in the playoffs and I had no kind of, I didn't have this Atlanta game in my mind. But yeah, still at the end of the day, I think that this is the most talented group of defenders in the front seven that the offensive line has had to deal with so far. And that's a bit worrisome, but at the same time, going back in the season, I had a similar concern really early in the year about their game against Denver. Denver obviously has a lot of guys, including Von Miller, in that front that are really scary. And it was like 2 weeks prior that they absolutely mauled the Cowboys offense. So it's like, oh man, this is going to be a tough game. And then the Eagles hung 40 on them. And then similarly, the Eagles, the the Los Angeles Chargers. It's going to be a while before I get used to that. The Chargers defenses, had a really good year. I think they were top 5 in scoring defense. Guys like, Joey Bosa and Melvin Ingram, Corey Liuget, really good group of defenders in that front as well. And the Eagles ran for like 160 yards on them. So ultimately, I think that the Eagles have the best offensive line in football. And, while the Vikings defense scares me, and it scares me more than a lot of other units they've played, I think that at the end of the day, if there was a unit to trust against, the Vikings offensive line, it would be the Eagles offensive line.
All right, and do you think that sort of that Everson Griffin Vaitai matchup is like a huge problem?
Yeah, I think so, because Vaitai has had a better season than he had last year, because he had to play a lot in relief of Lane Johnson last year when Johnson got suspended. And speed seems to be the issue, and I know that that's kind of Everson Griffin's calling card. But the Eagles have no problem helping him out. You put Brent Selleck on the line as that or even bringing in another offensive tackle. You know, they were doing a lot of heavy sets against the Falcons and bringing in a lot of tight end help and or chipping them with the running back. So I think that, you know, Doug Peterson's well aware of Vaitais' weaknesses as a pass blocker and is willing to scheme around it to help him out. I think that, you know, Griffin's going to get his. I mean, he's bound to get at least one sack and, you know, create a lot of pressure. But the offense has done a really good job in the past of trying to scheme around those guys.
Well, let's talk about those tight ends. You mentioned Brent Selleck potentially helping out. All three of those tight ends seem like they can be dangerous in different ways. So Selleck's a veteran. We've seen him for a while. Zach Ertz, I think he leads the team in receiving yardage.
Yes.
And Trey Burton has 5 touchdowns, and he's done pretty well when he's been on the field. Do you see that as a potential X factor for the team? It sounds like, you know, when all other matchups potentially fail, they can go to their tight ends.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's really dangerous about the offense too, especially a team that likes to run or who does like to run the ball a lot with Nick Foles, is that you can run a lot of 2 tight end sets and give your offensive line extra help in the running game while giving the offense flexibility to pass out of those sets and still have dynamic receivers on the field, you know, with Trey Burton, with Zach Ertz. You know, Brent Selleck is, you know, he's moving slower than time at this point, but he's still a very valuable blocker. I think that if they bring him in, it's either he's probably not going out for a pass most of the time. But yes, I think it definitely helps the offense to have this dynamic group of tight ends who can block and also contribute in the passing game.
Well, let's talk about the running backs. So Jay Ajayi has been getting fewer attempts per game since being traded from the Dolphins, but he's been doing a lot better in those attempts, fumble aside. And Corey Clement has had some really spectacular moments this year. LeGarrette Blount is finally performing outside of New England and doing pretty well for the Eagles. So how do you see this backfield developing? Like, what are the situations that you see? Is it just a drive-by-drive thing? Is it a situational, you know, 3rd and long, we like this guy, 3rd and short, we like, you know, Blount or whatever? How are the running backs used? And how do you think those running backs can kind of take advantage of the space that's usually afforded by that offensive line?
The running back usage is a little bit of a head scratcher, and Eagles writers have been wondering about this, you know, especially during the Atlanta game where you didn't see Ajayi for most of the last quarter of the game after he'd been running so well. You know, Doug says he really is interested in staying with the hot hand, you know, in the conversation between Blount and Ajayi. I think dynamically they're very similar backs. You know, they're big, athletic, bruiser guys who maybe won't pull away from a defense, but are really going to wear a group down over the course of a game trying to tackle. You know, Ajayi is 230 pounds. You know, Blount's probably closer to 250. And as for Clement's like the receiving back. He's really good on screens. He's really good, you know, running wheel routes out of the backfield. He got a lot of production on those against Atlanta. He's a very good runner in terms of kind of like a change-up back. The thing that's like frustrating about the Eagles running backs groups is there is really no like home run hitter, which I think changes kind of the dynamic of the offense a little bit, especially when you're running the ball, because they're all kind of like, you know, you're going to get 4 yards, you might get 15 or 20 yards, but you're never going to get that big breakaway run, that game-changing, you know, 90. I mean, I remember like against the Cowboys earlier in the season, Ajayi he had like so much space, like any other running back would have housed that run, and he got caught from behind. I think that there's some concern in the building right now about Ajayi's health. There's some rumors swirling about, you know, maybe the knees aren't doing so great, and that's why they kind of rested him at the end of the game. I don't know how much merit there is to that conversation. I mean, Ajayi has well documented knee issues in the past, but situationally between Blount and Ajayi, there's really no method to who's going to get the ball. I mean, you know, they might just kind of try to keep in the guy who has good rhythm.
So one thing I find this like kind of fascinating. So I mean, the Eagles have only allowed 7 rushing touchdowns, so that's great, but they've only scored 9. That feels really low, and part of it, you know, Carson Wentz doesn't have a rushing touchdown. Also kind of weird, all things considered. But Corey Clement leads running backs with 4 rushing touchdowns. And then Blount only has 2. Ajayi only has 1. Wendell Smallwood, Kenyon Barnard each have 1, at least for regular season scores. That's weird, right? Like, it feels like you're talking about how good this team is in short yardage. You're talking about how good this team is up front with their running game. Why are there so few rushing touchdowns?
the team loved passing in the red zone, and I think that was ultimately the big difference. And it changed, the red zone calling changed a little bit once Nick Foles, but I mean, Carson Wentz was surgical in the red zone this year. And, they had a guy, with Zach Ertz and Alshon Jeffrey, it was really easy to throw down there because you have these really big targets. And, even Aguilar, a guy like Aguilar was really efficient catching the ball in the red zone as well. And I think that kind of goes back to the Andy Reid philosophy. You pass to set up the run, and that even went for in short yardage situations. I mean, even the team liked to pass a lot in, 3rd and 2 and 3rd and 4 situations as well. So I think it just goes to the identity of the football team with Carson Wentz and how that affected the stat sheet, because, Wentz's touchdown rate compared to the rest of the league, I think was like abnormally high this year. And I think it's just like the rate in which the team passed in the red zone versus other teams, which would probably opt to run more.
Yeah, fair enough. Let's talk about those receivers. So this one worries me. So Alshon Jeffrey versus Xavier Rhodes, I'm actually not that worried about it. You think that Alshon Jeffrey is the best receiver on the team? A lot of people made.
I think Nelson Aguilar is the best.
Okay, receiver. We were having a conversation in a direct message earlier. That's what I picked up from that. I'm mostly worried about Nelson Aguilar, so we're on the same page suddenly. I'm not that worried about Xavier Rhodes, Alshon Jeffrey. He'll get his. Jeffrey's fine. But the Nelson Aguilar and Mackenzie Alexander matchup worries me a lot. Tell me a little bit about how Aguilar has kind of revived his career with the Eagles, what the move to the slot has done, and what advantages that he can provide for them in the passing game.
I think it was pretty incredible early in the preseason, because all of these beat writers were talking about how Nelson just looked so much faster in training camp, and he added some weight, and he was running faster, and he was like a lot more vocal and confident, and I was kind of reading that as training camp. Everybody gets training camp hype, like, oh, this is the best shape of my life, et cetera, et cetera. And then he actually came in and he started playing. That level of confidence was. I mean, it was the first game of the season against Washington where Carson kind of threw this. This prayer of a pass up to Nelson. Nelson like snatched it away from the defender, landed, really, I mean, kind of not dissimilar from Diggs's touchdown last week, kind of like snatched it up over the defender, kind of landed awkwardly, but like gained his balance and then ran it in for like 30 more yards for a touchdown. It was an incredibly athletic play by him. And that was kind of the signal that I was like, oh, okay, this Nelson's really good. Like he's got it. And I think it was just a confidence thing. It's always hard adjusting to the NFL, and the staff with Chip Kelly wasn't nurturing enough for young players, and it kind of kind of spiraled for him. Mm-hmm. And I think that guys like Carson, working with guys like Carson Wentz and Alshon Jeffrey and Torrey Smith, I think having those veteran presence in the wide receiver room really helped him out. And the team really showing a lot of faith in him really helped him out. But the move to the slot has been tremendous for him, because it really maximizes the best part of his game, which is his yards after catch ability. I mean, he's getting these 5-yard passes that he's turning into, 15-yard gains, 20-yard gains, because he's so good at going from receiver to runner, in a cinch. And he's really improved as a route runner. He's incredibly tough now, which is like such an awesome development. I mean, he had a huge catch against the Falcons where he got crushed by Keanu Neal and he held on to it. Nelson Aguilar of the past would his hands would have not touched that ball. And he was able to hold on to this just under a crushing blow. And I think that's what makes him so valuable. He's tough. He's athletic. He's making these impressive catches in traffic, and then he's creating yards after the catch. And for a guy like Nick Foles, where you need that short passing game to have those dynamic guys who can create those yards, after they catch the football, Aguilar, it needs to be a big part of the offense now.
So I think catch rate is a pretty awful statistic, but it's at least notable to talk about it in the case of Alshon Jeffrey. 120 targets, which is, a good deal more. It's about 50 more than Torrey Smith's and a good deal like 30 more than Nelson Aguilar's, but fewer catches than Aguilar. His catch rate is 47.5%. Again, not a great statistic, but kind of tell me why that is. Why is it he's so heavily targeted, comes down with the ball, relatively speaking, so rarely compared to the rest of the team? Why did he get such a big deal? It sounded like you were pretty high on him. What's up?
I think that it kind of goes back to what I was saying before about, Torrey Smith and throwing to Torrey Smith to kind of let the defense know that he's there. They did that a lot with Alshon Jeffrey as well, because Alshon Jeffrey obviously is, this 6'4" red zone threat. And he can make those big plays down the field, and he has done for the Eagles. And because of that, the Eagles have kind of thrown to him a lot in low percentage situations. Either one, to give him a chance at making that play, on third down or in the red zone or what have you, or to kind of just establish the deep ball and establish that the offense is willing to attack that part of the field. I think just the nature and the way, the nature of which and how they use him as, their jump ball receiver, as their red zone guy and kind of a deep threat sometimes. It lends itself to him being a lower percentage pass catcher relative to a guy like Nelson Agholor, who's catching a lot of screens, who's catching a lot of slant passes, stuff that's within like 7 yards of the line of scrimmage. So, I mean, it makes sense. And I think that, there's still a lot of value with a guy like him because of what he's able to do in the red zone, because of his size, because of what he's able to do down the field. And also the fact that, he's also been a really big mentor, apparently, for Nelson Agholor. And the Eagles now value character and personality in the locker room a great deal. So I think they wanted to keep him around. And that's why I thought that deal was so good. And another thing, too, is, part of establishing, or having that guy on the outside, which defenses are respecting down the field, is it's creating space for Nelson Agholor to become a more efficient receiver, as it's created space for Zach Ertz to become a more efficient receiver.
All right, let's pull back and talk a little bit about the sort of the schematic matchup. So Peterson's used a lot of play action. He's used a lot of RPO. You mentioned pop passes, sort of read option runs. One thing I kind of noticed in the Atlanta game, Foles had enormous running lanes on read options, and he still elected to hand it off. Is he going to take the ball at one point, or?
I mean, there are tectonic plates that move faster than Nick Foles, and I think he's aware of that. And it's funny because when he was here with Chip Kelly, he would actually opt to take the read fairly often, and he had like 150 rushing yards or something ridiculous like that, for a guy like him under Chip Kelly. But I think he seems a little bit more hesitant to do so. I don't think there was one play where it wasn't a design running play. It was just a passing play where he had this huge lane to step up and maybe scramble for like even 5 yards. And he just like held on to it and eventually just threw it away. So I wouldn't, if I were a defensive coordinator, I wouldn't worry about the Nick Foles ground game very much.
So he is averaging 0.3 yards per attempt on 11 attempts this year. Carson Wentz, 4.7 yards per attempt. Just, for some small comparison between the two. Okay, so that kind of stuff still opens up stuff in the passing game, because kind of the brilliance of the repass option or packaged plays is what they were known, even just like 4 years ago. Now we got to come up with new names for the same stuff. Is that it's not quite the same as play action. You take a look at what's better for you as the play develops and choose the run or choose the pass. How do you think the Vikings, respond to that, and how effective do you think they'll be? Because, they do a ton of cover 2, ton of cover 4, ton of cover 1, ton of cover 3. They've done cover 6. They're very versatile sort of at the back end. They play a lot of man. They play a lot of zone. They're very versatile at the front end in terms of their coverage. What do you think is kind of the ideal schematic response to, I'm not going to say gimmicks, but sort of the unique quirks of the way Doug Peterson has managed this Foles offense?
Well, I think that, I think the best thing to do, the best way to beat Nick Foles is rush 4 and crowd the middle of the field, because what Doug has done so well in terms of scheming for Nick Foles is scheming against blitzes. Atlanta was bringing a lot of heat, and he was able to counter that with those quick passes, with those screen passes where you have so many defenders attacking the quarterback. If you get one good block on the outside for a wide receiver or for a running back, that guy's going to go for 20 yards. So if you're able to have guys who sit back in coverage, and this is why I think the Vikings have such good personnel to match up with the Eagles offense is because they can get pressure with 4 and they can kind of crowd the middle of the field really effectively with their, with really athletic linebackers and of course Harrison Smith.
All right, let's switch sides to the other side of the ball. So the Eagles obviously have a very impressive defense despite what happened in the Giants game. And a lot of it has to do with Brandon Graham is like finishing more often, that linebacker core. Even without, Jordan Hicks is doing really well. The secondary has really improved, but it really feels like something has changed. And, Jim Schwartz has always been a talented defensive coordinator, but what is different about the Eagles defense this year that makes them so much more potent than in previous years?
Well, I think it starts with the personnel, and I don't want to take anything away from Jim Schwartz, but Jim Schwartz just kind of has in the past had the defense that he's run, and he kind of runs it to a certain orthodoxy. And the defense is just so solid at every level of the ball that he can kind of run this kind of 4-man pressure defense that's really run a lot of cover 2 and cover 4. Although he's been running more cover 3 lately. And the other thing is, too, that he has been blitzing a lot more than I can ever remember him blitzing and utilizing the athleticism of guys like, Michael Kendricks as a blitzer and even bringing, Malcolm Jenkins and Rodney McLeod as blitzers as well. That's been a really nice wrinkle in the group. I think that the defense still has the same weaknesses that's had in the past. You notice that the team is really vulnerable to slant passes. And it's basically, offense is getting smart about the nature of the defense and, the team doesn't press a lot. It doesn't. So what teams are trying to get the ball out quickly and running these like 5-yard slant passes has ended up really hurting. And that was what the problem against the Giants was, like a million slant passes from Sterling Shepard and, Evan Ingram. And, that's like any game where the Eagles had a lot of points scored on them, like that was ultimately the big problem. And, that's still that's a reason for worry. But I think that ultimately, guys like Jalen Mills have been playing really good football, and Ronald Darby has been playing, increasingly, good football since he's come back from his ankle injury, and the safeties are really good. And the whole linebacker thing is that the team doesn't really play with more than 2 linebackers on the field very often, especially since they're able to stop the run so well with just their defensive line. So they've had the flexibility of playing with, playing a lot in nickel defense and bringing Malcolm Jenkins down in the slot as that 7th defender. And the strength of the defensive line is really kind of the heartbeat of the defense in it, that it gives them a lot of flexibility in what to do with the back 7.
Now let's talk about the defensive line in a little bit more detail. So one of the things that's changed this year is, Brandon Graham has always been very good at getting pressure, but this year he's been doing a very good job at finishing, actually getting those sacks. Is that sort of, hey, people regress to the mean, and if you get a lot of pressure without a lot of sacks, you're likely to get more sacks the next year with the same amount of pressure? Or is there something different about the way that he's playing?
I think that it's more that the secondary's been a lot stronger. So it's like the fact that, the quarterback has to hold the ball for another millisecond has helped the defensive line produce a lot more tremendously. And the other part is bringing in more talent. I mean, the addition of Timmy Jernigan and, Derek Barnett can't really be understated in terms of what it's been able to do for the defense, because in the past, it's really just been about, Brandon Graham and Fletcher Cox and what they've been able to do. But the fact that you can have a defensive line, I also want to bring Chris Long into this conversation as well, because he's been a really nice complementary defender, pass rusher. But the fact that, at any given moment, you can have 4 really strong defensive linemen on the field at any given time. In the past, it's only been 2 most of the time. It really changes the ability for, a guy like Brandon Graham to finish. And it also gives the defensive, gives Jim Schwartz a lot more flexibility. Like, they have all these different packages where you're going to have, Chris Long and Derek Barnett play defensive end. And then Brandon Graham is actually playing a 3 technique alongside of Fletcher Cox, who's also playing the 3 technique in that wide 9 look. And, stuff like that, where they're able to kind of move guys around, and also where, offensive lines can't really game plan for a single guy or even just 2 guys. It makes it a lot easier for, the edge rushers to produce.
All right. So, Malcolm Jenkins, quite a good player. Brandon Graham, quite a good player. Fletcher Cox is probably the most talented player on the team, but is he also the most important?
I would say that he is. I think that he's the catalyst on the defensive line. He's going to get the most attention on any given snap and free up guys for Timmy Jernigan and Brandon Graham and Derek Barnett. And the addition of Derek Barnett was really interesting because the defensive line's problem over the past couple of years has been, getting a lot of pressure but not a lot of sacks. And what Derek Barnett was so good at when he was at Tennessee for 3 years was like finishing and like using that motor and kind of, turning other people's pressure into sacks or turning his own pressure into sacks. So I think, his success this year is kind of indicative of the rest of the defensive line's success this year, which has been really feeding off of the attention that Fletcher Cox gets, because rarely are guys getting singled up, or rarely are guys getting doubled up. Besides Fletcher. So, Brandon Graham, is one-on-one with an offensive tackle because, the running back is chipping inside to Fletcher Cox, or, they're running plays where even the tight end comes around to help out against Fletcher Cox. And, if they decide not to help out with Fletcher Cox and they're moving guys out to, help with Brandon Graham, then like Cox gets pressure immediately. And also the other part of that is what he's able to do as a run defender. And the run defense has been so good this year, in part because the interior defense has been so disruptive.
So there's a lot of elements to what makes a defense good, but I'm kind of curious as to what happens in those instances when the defense is not particularly good. When the defensive line hasn't, sort of driven the Eagles defense to kind of shutting down opponents, what's happened when things go wrong? Like when opponents are able to run the ball, why is it?
I think it comes down to, if teams are really able to open up the defense with the passing game, we saw again, in both of the Giants games, it was really an issue that they were like that quick passing game, and guys like Sterling Shepard, and in the first Giants game, Odell Beckham Jr. were able to get yards out after the catch with that short passing game. And I think that, and if the team is really trying to blitz a lot to then, create pressure against the pass. And if you're giving up big plays and you want to try to then get big plays to offset, then the defense is playing really aggressively, and it starts to get easy to like run something like a draw play. And like, that's been a play that's been successful against the Eagles. It was successful against the Eagles, against even the Falcons. So it's like, I feel like it's really it ends up being a momentum thing. I hate to bring that in, but the defense, it kind of feeds off of their own success. So if you're able to get early wins in the game against the unit, then it could start to deteriorate over the course of the game.
When offenses choose to kind of spread the ball out versus when they decide to close things in, basically, do they have one receiver out wide and everyone else is tied to the formation, or if they've got, 4 eligible receivers kind of spreading things out? What has been more difficult for the Eagles, both in the run and in the passing game?
I think that they have definitely more difficulty dealing with the spread, which is why I thought it was so interesting that the Falcons, this kind of comes down to like why the Falcons ultimately lost, because their game plan was so shoddy on offense. They came out with a lot of heavy formations, a lot of 2 tight end sets, bringing out another offensive lineman, and really wanted to play out of those formations, both in the passing game and in the running game. And it didn't really make any sense. The Eagles' strengths on defense are their ability to match up with those kind of heavy formations. But the place that the Eagles are thinnest at is at cornerback. Or I don't want to say thinnest, but it's the youngest unit really on the team, and the most inexperienced unit. So if you're getting the most defensive backs on the field and matching up that way, like that's going to be a lot easier to expose. And if you're trying to group them up, and if the group is just Jalen Mills and Ronald Darby on the outside, and then you have Malcolm Jenkins on the, playing, as that 7th defender in the box with 2 linebackers and that defensive line, like that's really the strength of the defense. You don't really want to play them like that, because they have all of their best players out on the field that way. But the more you stretch them out, the more linebackers they have to take off the field and to replace them with defensive backs, the weaker they're going to get.
All right. So Jalen Mills, bad until this year. Patrick Robinson, bad until maybe last year, this year. Ronald Darby, pretty good a rookie year, kind of fell back a little bit last year, good this year. Flukiness, a genuine increase in talent, schematic changes, what's up?
I am a little bit of a Jalen Mills truther. I don't actually think
he's definitely bad last year. Come on.
Yeah, man. No, as in that I think that he's still not a very great. Like, I don't think he's
okay.
Like people really love him because he's like confident and he's like, he talks a lot of crap and he makes that's the thing that like is easily very likable about him is that he is like kind of a playmaker. But I still think that he's more vulnerable he is probably the most vulnerable member of the secondary up until this he is the most vulnerable member of the secondary, and he has a tendency to give up more big plays than like a guy like Ronald Darby does or has done. But I think it comes down to just like I said before, like it's a very like the team has kind of this swagger to them and they feed off of all of their own energy. And when they're all playing well, there's like a symbiosis on the group. But also like schematically, there's that symbiosis between the defensive line and the cornerbacks where like if the cornerbacks are able to cover longer, the defensive line is going to get more pressure. But at the same side, or the defensive line is going to get more sacks. But in the same end, the defensive line getting more pressure is going to mean that it makes the job for the cornerback a lot easier. And I think that's why he's been so successful this year. It's kind of his brand of like being very physical, very early in the route and physical with the ball in the air. Like he's not the fastest player, but ultimately that's played to his strengths. So he hasn't had to cover for a long time most of the time. And he's like a big guy and he has good ball skills. So like he's like a solid player, but I think that he's really maximized by the talent of the of the front four. And I would say the same really goes for Patrick Robinson. I think that him playing in the slot full time really plays to his strengths. But I think the argument can be made for anyone in the secondary that the group is really elevated by the talent of the pass rush.
All right. Well, how does the secondary organize themselves? Is it a much more? Do you see a lot of shadowing? Is there a lot of sides? Do they play a lot of zone, a lot of man, cover 1, cover 3, cover 2, cover 4? What are the tendencies within that secondary?
It's a lot of off man, and they don't really. And it's a lot of off man, cover 3, and I would say cover 4. They don't play a lot of. They don't play a lot of shadowing. It's really sides oriented. I mean, they had a ton of guys. They had any which cornerback lined up over Julio Jones. And I think that was pretty indicative about how they feel about the group, but also how they feel schematically about like moving guys around and shadowing guys. Like I personally, like I would probably like, if I were coordinating the group, like I would want my, my best defender over the best receiver, like all the time. Like I would want Ronald Darby covering Julio Jones as much as possible. Although to his credit, I mean, Jalen Mills, I just ripped him a little bit, but he did play very well against Julio Jones for much of the game. But they do play a lot of off man, and I think that's why they're super they play like off man. Like they'll play like 7 or even like 10 yards off the line of scrimmage, and that's why I think they're so vulnerable to that quick passing game, which has always really frustrated me.
And then Malcolm Jenkins got voted into the Pro Bowl above Harrison Smith. Why?
That's a tough question. Probably just because like more media presence. Honestly, It's a bigger market.
Don't worry about the actual question.
Malcolm Jenkins is really good, though. Malcolm Jenkins is really good. I think that he is like he is kind of underrated. I think because what the stuff that he's asked to do on the defense, like he works really well as a pass rusher, and they basically use him as a third linebacker in these nickel sets. He's a very good run defender, and then he's also plays a lot of slot cornerback for the team. I mean, the team doesn't really have like the personnel to run a lot of 3 cornerback sets because of the youth of their secondary. So Malcolm is asked, as the strong safety to play the slot very often, and he does a very, very good job of it. I mean, he's an incredibly versatile defender, plays deep down the field as well, plays in those short zones, hard hitter, and he's like the emotional leader of the defense. So it's like he's been such a big presence for the team, since he's gotten here, but also, I mean, this year at the kind of like their peak. So
do you feel like he's also at his peak? Because it feels like he's been good for a while, but it seems like he's playing better this year too. Maybe, like you said, elevated by the talent around him.
Yeah, and I think that's what it is. I mean, he was good as soon as he got to Philly back in 2014. He was like the first Eagle in like decades to get like 3 interceptions. in 3 consecutive games, and he had like 2 pick sixes that year, something like that. He was like good immediately for the team, which was interesting because he wasn't like, he was viewed as kind of a liability during his career in New Orleans. But yeah, I think he's kind of at his peak because the team is really at its peak, and he's kind of just functioning within a much more competent unit. And it's really great to see. But the other side of it too, because I think the defense has gotten more creative since this year with the blitzing and using him more in that role as like a pass rusher. And a slot cornerback and a linebacker. So because of that too, I think he has like more opportunities to feature himself as being this really good player.
And then Rams fans were, not all of them, many Rams fans were happy to see Rodney McLeod go, but you were excited to see him come into Philadelphia. Has that excitement borne out? Are you happy with this play? What's up?
He's like, okay. Like, I think that he's incredibly like this incredibly athletic guy who just, he'll have these moments where he just flies over the top of the defense as the deep safety and makes these incredible plays on the ball or these big hits or something like that. He's a really big hitter, even though he's a smaller defender. And those moments are like, yay. But, overall, he's just kind of, he's been fine. He hasn't been like the game changer that I was kind of hoping he'd be. Like, I thought that he was like, his last year in St. Louis was kind of hopefully like indicative of what he would be for the rest of his kind of prime. But he's been a little bit more up and down. Mm-hmm. But I mean, he's still been a playmaker, and I think that's kind of what the team wants from a lot of their defensive backs. Like they don't want to, like, obviously you don't want to give up big plays, but if you're going to give up big plays, you need to also make big plays for yourself. So the fact that McLeod has, he has had a tendency to give up some big catches, but at the same time makes a lot of really big hits. Dislodges the ball, passes defended. And so he kind of feeds into the whole mentality of the defense that they're a bunch of like, playmakers and hard hitters and like really physical players. So I think from a philosophical standpoint, it's good to have him there. But like, if I were to say like immediately, like what position needs upgrading, this offseason, free safety might be like one of the first 2 positions out of my mouth.
If you could have Kurt Coleman back instead of him, he's playing really well in Carolina.
No, I wouldn't. I think that Carolina's scheme has really benefited Kurt Coleman. I like Kurt Coleman though. I met him once actually. I was at a suit drive in this town right near my hometown, and Kurt Coleman was there. He's very short. He's my height. He's actually my height.
That's not true.
I have photographic evidence. I need to find it, but I have photographic evidence. Me standing next to him. We are the same height. Nice guy though. No, I think McLeod is like kind of like your league average safety, which is kind of all you can ask, with the level of the quality of safety in this league. It's
very Sendejo the way you've been describing McLeod. All right. Yeah, there's a lot of...
He is the Ringo. He is really the Ringo of the Eagles defense. So where he's kind of fine on his own, but everyone else is just so good that you just like, he's like, whatever,
Well, let's talk about this from a matchup perspective. You got Thielen, you got Diggs, probably the best receiver pair in the NFL. And if not, they're in the conversation. What worries you about Thielen and or Diggs and or the combination? And you can't just say Jalen Mills.
I think that would you agree with me that Diggs is the better one of those two? It's just that Thielen is like the more involved one. Is that a contentious debate among Vikings fans about which is the better of the two?
Not really. So I've been saying this since like I think the midpoint of the season when Thielen started overtaking Diggs from a production standpoint, and no one's been really upset by me saying it. And maybe it's because I always follow it with, but it doesn't really matter. They're both kind of top 10 receivers. But I think Diggs is the better of the 2 receivers. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that his play last week kind of confirmed that, because that was just like, people talk a lot about like the Marcus Williams, and I don't want to get too off topic, of course, but people talk about the Marcus Williams whiff, but that was just like a freak play for Diggs to make. Not just the catch, but the recovery as well. I think like most, like 90% of the receivers or 95% of the receivers in the NFL fall down and like fall out of bounds. Like they take themselves out of that play, like coming down with the ball. So it's like for him to recover like that and just keep running, unbelievable. And like that's what scares me. It's like he's a playmaker. Like he is going to make he's with the ball in his hands that are kind of like independent of everyone else, like can threaten to score against even a very good defense, like like the Saints have. So that really scares me. And the fact that the Eagles could kind of key on defending against Julio Jones, like Mohamed Sanu is fine, but this is a wide receiver duo, unlike the Eagles have faced this year, paired with a quarterback who's able to use them. Like I'd argue that in a vacuum, like a duo like Emmanuel Sanders and Demaryius Thomas, like in the past would have been really dangerous for the Eagles to face. But with Brock Osweiler, it doesn't really matter. But like with Case Keenum, who's willing to use his receivers, and what I think Keenum is, I think that he's kind of like. Actually, I don't want to bring this comparison. I don't want to make it an argument. But the thing that, like, what Case Keenum is so good about, I was going to make a Nick Foles comparison, but I'm not going to do that.
I mean, you've been doing it kind of accidentally this whole podcast. Don't worry about it.
It reminds me of the 2013 Foles season. But
no, you shouldn't have said that. Jesus.
I'm sorry. No, but like what Case is so good at is being like, I have these really great receivers. Like, I'm going to trust them. And that's exactly what he's doing. Like he's willing to, trust Diggs down the field, trust Thielen in those tough situations. And that really scares me as an Eagles fan because it's kind of spreads the defensive attention in a way that hasn't done this season really. And the team has shown to have problems with these speedy receivers. I mean, Tyreek Hill proved to be a problem. What's his name? Tyrell Williams proved to be a problem. Keenan Allen, like these star receivers are going to have their way with the Eagles to a certain level. So it is a little bit frightening.
So my impression of the way the Eagles secondary is, kind of the shape of it is that, aside from Malcolm Jenkins, let's just talk about the cornerbacks for a second, is that the way that they've been playing, all of them have been playing probably above average if you, give a sort of a heavy weight towards playmaking, say for Jalen Mills. And they don't seem to be, they make way fewer mistakes, it seems like. But when playing against like a Thielen or a Diggs, Diggs and Thielen are both just more talented than any individual member of that cornerback core is what it feels like. And so they can be overmatched, even though there's not like a weakness. Is that fair?
Yeah, like I just think that it's like ultimately they aren't an incredibly talented group. I think that the success of the pass defense has been very much about what the front four has been able to do, what the linebackers are able to do, what the safeties are able to do. And the cornerbacks have just basically been beneficiaries of that. If you were to talk about like one-on-one, like what does Thielen do to Jalen Mills? What does Diggs do to Ronald Darby? Like I would say that, the receivers are more talented than the cornerbacks. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, but it does bring up a second question, which is if Brandon Graham is getting sacks because the secondary is doing better, the secondary is doing better because the front four are doing better. Give me like the egg. What's first?
Well, I think that's like that. That's such an important question, and I don't know if I totally have the answer for it. But I think it's just like the slight improvement, honestly, from last year to this year, like the maturity of the defense, the maturity of Jalen Mills, like bringing in a guy who has a few years under his belt, like Ronald Darby, like Patrick Robinson, has given the defense like that much extra help on like in terms of coverage. And it's like it's a game of seconds and inches, so like that half second of coverage will help the defense more, and those errant throws from more pressure from a more talented defensive line than the Eagles had last year with Timmy Jernigan and Derek Barnett and Chris Long now coming into the fold. Those errant passes under pressure are going to lead to a more more playmaking from the cornerbacks and from the secondary.
And then finally, before we get to anything like a score prediction, let's talk about this linebacker group. So it always felt like the Eagles, they're a team, like you said, they're nickel a lot. They play with a lot of two linebackers, and they had three really good linebackers. Michael Kendricks was kind of on the outs, didn't get a bunch of snaps last year. Jordan Hicks gets injured again. And Kendrick steps in, does a really good job. What do you think are the strengths and weaknesses of that linebacker core, especially as it pertains to the Vikings combination of Latavius Murray and Jerick McKinnon and an offensive line that's kind of up and down? And then B, what's the future of that linebacking core?
That second question is a really good question and one that I've been struggling with. But as for the strengths of the team, I mean, it really sucked when Jordan Hicks went down, because honestly, I think there was a really strong argument early in the season to say that, Jordan Hicks, Nigel Bradham, and Michael Kendricks were the best three linebacking core in the NFL. And then of course you lose Hicks. He's the inside linebacker, kind of the emotional leader, of those three. But Michael Kendricks is enjoying the best season of his career, and Kendricks, and how good he's been has always kind of been in abstract, because he's always been a very flashy player. He's a very athletic player. And this seems to be the year that he's really taken up the mantle as being living up to his potential. He's a fantastic blitzer, but also really improved, even in the last couple of years in terms of, his awareness and coverage. He's done a really good job attacking screens. And then his speed is so useful against, chasing down plays from the backside in terms of run defense. Bradham is awesome. He's like the total badass of the defense. Really physical guy, has no problem going downhill against the run, and very underrated player in coverage. And he will hit you. Doesn't matter if you're a running back or a wide receiver or a tight end. And he's this really important, I think, tone setter on the team. And since Hicks went down, they've really been functioning with just those two guys. They've been doing a good. I mean, they've had Joe Walker and Najee Goode come in from time to time as that third linebacker, but they really play a lot nickel because of Malcolm Jenkins' ability to play against the run as the strong safety. It's given them a lot of defensive flexibility. But I really think that Kendricks and Bradham are two very well-rounded players, who thrive in coverage, who play the run pretty well, and in Kendrick's case can also rush the passer. So even, I'm not really worried about the Vikings run game, because I haven't really been worried about anybody's run game this year. The team has done such a good job, stopping most running games they've gone up against and running backs they've gone up against.
And so to kind of put things into a little bit of perspective, so Michael Kendricks, Eric Kendricks' brother, is so athletic that and kind of a flashy player that he compares more, I think, to Anthony Barr than he does his own brother Eric Kendricks.
Yeah.
Nigel Bradham compares more to Eric Kendricks, honestly. Although I think Eric Kendricks is a little bit better in coverage, even though, as you said, Nigel Bradham's a little bit underrated. But Michael is a super athletic, like in the Jamie Collins, Anthony Barr, Ryan Shazier kind of territory of athleticism.
Yeah, I mean, he ran something like a 4.39, that was his unofficial time at the combine at 240 pounds. That is just unreal athleticism. And I remember they don't do it a lot under Schwartz, but when Billy Davis was the defensive coordinator under with Chip Kelly, they would a lot of the times use Kendricks as a defensive edge rusher, and he would bend the edge, as good as anybody, and he would get pressure and get sacks and stuff that way. I mean, he's just an incredibly athletic chess piece to move around the defense. And I think that Schwartz has been more willing to use him that way than he did last year, which I think has also helped the defense because of the extra pressure that brings.
Yeah. So I think that gives us a better kind of I think people get too caught up in the fact that the brothers, which, by the way, another Eagles connection, along with Pat Shurmur, another Eagles connection. But people get too caught up in the brother thing. Literally, Michael Kendricks is really a lot like Anthony Barr, Ryan Shazier, and Jamie Collins.
Oh yeah, for sure, definitely in that mold.
Okay, cool. So let's talk about score predictions. So the Vikings are favored by 3. The over under I think is pretty low. It's like 38 or something like that, which makes sense. People don't have a ton of confidence in Keenum. People have less confidence in Foles. Both defenses are really good. The Vikings top 1 or 2, depending on what metric you use. Eagles top 4, top 3. It's going to be kind of a grinded out slug, whatever game, unless you've got kind of a different idea in mind. What is your score prediction for the game?
Oh, it's going to be 16-13, and the Eagles are going to win the game.
Win.
I'm in. I'm all in right now. After they beat the Falcons, I was like, all right, I need to get on board, because that's a problem. I'm going to get on board. They're going to get blown out. So, but
Vikings fans haven't had that experience before. All right. Well, I'll take you up. I'll say it's going to be a 17-14 game, so 2 more points, but the Vikings win. I mean, they're the better team. It doesn't really matter.
I think you under. Okay, let me tell you something. Let me just tell you something, because I need to be a little bit of a homer right now. The Eagles' home field advantage is legit in the playoffs. Like, I have never seen. I've been to a lot of games at the Lincoln Financial Field. I've never seen the Lincoln Financial Field like it was on Saturday. It was unbelievably loud and windy and cold. I mean, that's just...
Yeah, if only the Minnesota Vikings had some means of practicing in the cold. God,
no, it's different. Oh man, Arif, you'll see.
I'll see. It's
okay. Windy. Well, here's the thing: is I promised, last week I promised Charles McDonald, who covers the Falcons. I was like, if the Eagles win, I will be in your texts for the rest of days. I felt really bad about the Eagles winning, actually, because it was it was just so poorly handled by the Falcons. I was like, all right, I can't be mean to Chuck. But if the Eagles beat the Vikings, I will be in your texts for the rest of days until you block me, or until the Patriots blow the Eagles out in the Super Bowl.
All right. Well, here's something that I think is pretty important. Let's talk about this third down thing. Right. Okay. So I got to pull it up just because I want to make sure that I have everything absolutely correct. So opponent third down conversion percentage. The Eagles are third in the NFL. That's really good. That's really, really good. Right. 32.1%. The Vikings are first in the NFL. Obviously, that's a little bit better. But the gap between the Vikings and the Eagles on third down defense, between 1 and 3, is as large as the gap between the Eagles and the Cleveland Browns at number 23. Okay, so it's not the same, man. The defense is just so good. I don't know what you're talking about, man. Home field advantage. It's windy. It's cold.
It's gonna be it's gonna be a low scoring game. Like, it's gonna be an absolute fist fight of a football game, which I'm really excited for, because I like those kind of games in the NFL a little bit more. But I don't know. I just think that there's something about this Eagles team that just, and I feel like it's kind of the same affect around this Vikings team too. There just feels like something kind of destined about they shouldn't have beat the Falcons. Are you kidding me? They shouldn't even be in the position they're in right now. But Doug Peterson is a really good coach, and I just need to kind of give into trusting that he's gonna.
Who has the better destiny narrative? I mean, the Vikings. The Vikings have had this, I think, just a significantly worse history going in. I mean, you actually go to 4 Super Bowls and lose them. Plus, they've got this decadal cycle. The Darren Nelson fumble. 1998, 2009. They even had a mini 2003 blow up. They've just been gut punched, I think, way more times than the Eagles. And Super Bowls at home. The narrative is the destiny is on the Vikings. So you have to admit that the story's better for the Vikings.
All right. You want to hear a cool stat?
I hate stats. That.
All right. So teams that have won in the playoffs on a walk-off touchdown are 0-4 in the following game.
What? That's such a ridiculous stat.
I'm just saying, I think this statistic, and there's never been a home Super Bowl. So I don't know. There is a reason.
What better story to tell than the home Super Bowl, fueled by the Minneapolis Miracle? Come on.
All right. Well, we'll see. How about that? We'll see about it.
Yeah. If only this game was played on Tuesday. The Vikings were dominant against the Eagles on Tuesdays. What's the Nick Foles playoff record? It's 1-1. Okay.
It's 1-1. It's 1-1. He's the only quarterback in NFL history to have his first 2 playoff starts with a 100+ quarterback rating.
Oh, yeah, he did have a 105 quarterback rating in that loss.
Yeah, but it's also that's he has had the 2 most unconvincing 100+ quarterback rating football games I've ever seen in my entire life.
Do you genuinely think that the Eagles have a better story going in? That feels so right.
I don't know. I mean, no, they don't. But they're just, I don't know. They're a likable team too. Right?
They are. They're a super likable team. Especially, given where our politics are, where most of that team is, super likable. But I mean, Adam Thielen was going to be a dental equipment salesman. That's a pretty good story.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. But Yeah, okay, that's fair. But also, like, I was reading the interview with Jay Ajayi after the Falcons game, and like that dude talking about how much he hates the Dolphins and how he wants to win a Super Bowl to like piss the Dolphins off. Like that level of petty just made me so even more an Eagles fan because it resonates with me.
That's true. There aren't any Vikings players with chips on their shoulder.
That's our destiny story. We need to piss off the Dolphins. I need this win,
dude. Our destiny story is Jay Ajayi is mad at the Dolphins.
Hey. Okay.
Dude, you're an actor.
All right. How about this? All right.
How are you so bad at telling stories?
Here's the destiny story. The destiny story, and not to get too political, but the destiny story is for Malcolm Jenkins' football team to beat Tom Brady in the Super Bowl, and then the entire team snub the White House visit. That would be, I mean, come on, like that would be something.
Oh yeah, things have been going really well for the left. That's a good point.
Yeah. That'd be great. They'd all just go to the new Philadelphia district attorney's house to celebrate their Super Bowl win. It'd be great.
It's terrible. You're so bad at telling stories. All right, Dusty, are there any?
You're not a writer.
Yeah, clearly. Dusty, are there any questions we didn't cover that we want Ben to answer? I think there's a cheesesteak one.
Yeah, there's a handful. You guys did a pretty good job, just like attacking the mailbag.
All right, go us.
Yeah. HVAC repairman writes in, why are the Eagles uniforms so bad? This is an urgent question.
This is I'm a uniform snob and I don't see anything wrong with the Eagles uniforms. They could be better.
Their prior uniform was way better though.
They could be better. I would prefer, I want Kelly Green back in my life. Like that would be so much better than the midnight green or the hunter green or whatever it is. But I think it's fine. Like it's definitely not the ugliest jersey in the NFL.
Okay, besides the Buccaneers, who is the ugliest jersey in the NFL?
Washington.
Don't count. Yeah, no, I think it looks good. It's just that got a racist mascot.
Any jersey that like brown does not look good on a jersey. So maybe the brown and orange. Don't they have there's like a little bit of brown, isn't there?
Yeah, but I mean,
it's gross. It's not a great color. And then
I think the Packers actually have a pretty poor jersey, but I'm super biased, so I can't really.
Yeah, and I like the Vikings have a really good jersey, but I think like the matte needs to be the entire color. Like I've always not liked the fact the helmets are matte, but the jersey color is like a little bit more shiny.
I definitely agree with you there. All right, best jersey.
Best jersey. Any powder blue jersey is good. If it's the Chargers powder blue jersey or the Panthers powder blue jersey is really good. The Falcons black jersey with the red helmets. Right. That's awesome. That any black alternate jersey is cool. I think every team should have a black alternate jersey, and it would just be so much cooler.
I think the Vikings, so they've got a black that they sell but don't wear. I don't actually think the Vikings black looks good.
I've never seen a black Vikings jersey.
It's people. I mean, they don't ever wear it, but people have black versions of the Vikings jersey. I don't think they look good. Plus, whenever you design a black jersey for the Vikings, you have to make sure it doesn't look like the Ravens.
True.
And that's tough. So I would say the Vikings. I agree with you that almost every team should have a black alternate, but I would have a tough time being convinced that any team in the NFC North, despite being the black and blue division, should have a black alternate.
Let me think about that. I think the Lions black jersey.
Yeah, that was the one I was kind of waffling on. I could see the Lions having a good black jersey.
Yeah, well, they do. Don't they have a black jersey?
Oh, do they? Well, if they do, I bet it looks.
I'm like 90%. Isn't their Color Rush jersey black?
Oh, maybe. I don't know. I don't count Color Rush. Oh, by the way, before we go on to the next mailbag question, Color Rush question. The Bengals should have just had white helmets, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Although the Bengals have the coolest jerseys in the NFL.
You think? I think it's a little hokey.
I like orange.
Oh, well.
I think orange is a good color.
Of course you do.
I can't wear orange. It's just offensive if I wear it.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's true.
Come on, guys. Everybody knows that the
Dusty.
Jaguars have the best black jerseys in the NFL.
Oh, true, Jaguar. There's a lot of good jerseys in the NFL.
Yeah.
For all the crap that we give the NFL, the jerseys mostly look good.
Yeah, I can't get over how bad that Bucks jersey is.
Yeah. Oh, the numbers. It's
kind of weird,
so, especially with how good their creamsicle jerseys are.
Yeah, the creamsicle is so good. The thing is, if the numbers were normal, it would still just be a bad jersey. But the numbers just take it to this next level.
Yeah,
just awful.
Yeah, because even the design on the shoulder pads is really like kind of clunky.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, next question.
Zen Cupid writes in, does the miracle play make you, Ben, more nervous for the matchup, or does it have little effect?
I just gave y'all a stat about miracle plays, so it's
dumb.
No,
Did you believe in the Eagles less after Deshaun Jackson's walk-off punt return touchdown against the Giants?
The Eagles went 0-3 after that punt return and lost in the playoffs. So I'm telling you the danger of believing in these plays. And like remember the Seahawks won the NFC Championship against the Packers on that last minute on that walk-off touchdown to Jermaine Kearse.
Telling me they didn't run the ball because they had a miracle play on an onside kick?
I'm saying that teams have so much magic, and
they have a finite amount of magic.
It's finite. Everyone is allocated a certain amount of magic before the season, and the Vikings are out of it. I'm sorry.
Well, how about this? Adam Vinatieri in the snow in the Tuck Rule game, followed by a decade of dominance by the Patriots. Come on, that's a miracle play. Plus, the whole 2001, 2002 Super Bowl against the Rams was a miracle play.
But I'm saying walk-off touchdowns. Like that is the miracle.
Only walk-off touchdowns.
So walk-off
touchdowns. I need to think of more
finite amount of magic theories.
Well, it's like the Cardinals against the Packers in 2000.
Wait, hold on. If it's only walk-off touchdowns, why'd you even include the Seahawks example?
Wasn't that a walk-off touchdown?
No, because the Brandon Bostic onside kick was the magic part.
No, well, that was their magic being run out over the course of the game.
Oh my!
They used all of their juju during that game.
What's the next? This is so dumb. What's the next one?
So walk-off touchdowns have a multi-season long skill cooldown.
Wait, what?
So walk-off touchdowns have a multi-season long skill cooldown, is what you're saying.
Yes.
That's something. Ted Glover. Did Ben boo Santa as a child, as all proper Philly sports fans do?
Or did you punch a horse in the face? Which one?
Well, that's unfair because I still boo Santa when I see him. We have something in New York called Santa Con, and
I thought that was in San Diego.
It's all over. I guess it's all over the country, but that has indoctrinated me into just hating Santa Claus. So yes, I've booed Santa. Actually, it's a Jewish conspiracy. We were taught to boo Santa from a very young age, and we've been.
Are you taught to boo Santa, or do you do it as like a matter of course when you get like a clay diet and your like friend gets an Xbox?
Well, that's the thing. There's a war on Christmas, and I fight it every day. And
war on Christmas, not over.
Right, so what are your Santa Claus on punching horses in the face? Then
I don't like horses. I've been afraid of horses.
Okay, this is incredible. You are a fan.
Wow.
I've been afraid of horses. So when I was very young, I took horseback riding lessons because I grew up on a farm.
For Eric Berry, but less athletic.
And I witnessed. I witnessed my friend get bucked off of a horse, and I was like 4 years old, and it was like really like scary. Like horses getting mad is really frightening. So it kind of traumatized me. So I'm like afraid of horses. So I wouldn't punch a horse in the face because I wouldn't get close enough to a horse.
You would if you could.
If I was like, if I could punch a horse in the face without retaliation, I'd probably consider it. But violence against animals is kind of screwed up. So
now it's screwed up after you've considered. Okay, cool.
I just don't like horses. I'm allowed to not like horses.
They're
horse
scary
is animals.
More afraid of you than you are of it.
Also, horses are made of glass. They get injured all the time. Anyway, sorry, my girlfriend's like a horse trainer.
People
and she,
who
complains about
ride glass horses.
They're like 2,000 pounds of like just muscle.
And brittle glass.
Fair, but they're scary, temperamental animals.
Skinny legs. Alex Goebel writes, how would you neutralize Zach Ertz if you were the defensive coordinator for the Vikings?
I mean, I'd probably just man him up with Harrison Smith, honestly. Like, that would be the best thing to do, because the thing that Ertz isn't great at is getting yards after the catch. So you'd want like a really physical tackler to kind of be covering him anyway. And I feel like that would probably be the best matchup for the Vikings, because he's really good against linebackers. I mean, he's much too athletic even for athletic. I mean, he made Duke Riley and Deion Jones look silly last week. So like I would be pretty fine with it, you know, if he was matched up on Eric Kendricks or, you know, even Anthony Barr. But Harrison Smith, that would probably be the matchup I'd be most worried about as an Eagles fan.
Don from Ohio writes in, thoughts on Todd Haley replacing Pat Shurmur as Vikings offensive coordinator next year?
I mean, what kind of bars do you guys have in Minneapolis? And how slippery is it?
Damn.
Because, is that inappropriate? Can I not make that joke?
No, you're fine.
It's too late.
All right. Too late.
What are your thoughts, Ben, on the dog masks and the fact that fans will be able to wear them into the stadium on Sunday?
I think it's a lot like the Guy Fawkes mask, where now we're all in solidarity with the underdog, and it's good. I think it's a good thing. I saw also there was like some comment about like if crime happens, like what will happen because everybody will be wearing a dog mask. And then it made me think of like the Joker thing where like everybody was wearing like the Joker mask or like had the Joker painted face. And I think that's probably not a worry. Like, is somebody in a dog mask gonna punch a horse in the face?
Almost certainly. What do you? Yeah, come on, man.
Only if the Eagles win. If the Eagles win and everybody's wearing a dog mask, then you probably have to worry. But otherwise, then you're just gonna have a bunch of sad dogs.
Will definitely punch a horse in the face while booing Santa.
Throwing batteries on the field, right? They threw.
Look,
batteries.
if you're wearing a Santa outfit in January, you deserve to be booed.
That's fair. I just hope there are no like SWAT teams nearby, because everybody knows there's nothing SWAT teams love more than shooting dogs.
Oh man.
Yeah,
that's true.
But it's true.
It's true. And like the Philadelphia Police Department has like an especially shoddy record with community engagement. So,
all right.
Welcome
to the Wide Left.
Welcome to the Wide Left podcast.
Oh, just wait.
We're getting there.
Nick Olson writes in, given how the Vikings struggled at times against the Panthers' read options, do you have any concern about the Eagles' run-pass options?
What's the best sounds way to like Nick Foles them? Runs like at 2 miles an hour, so I guess not.
I wouldn't worry about Nick Foles running in correlation to like Cam Newton running. Slightly different athletes, both tall, but slightly different athletes.
So,
but do you think that the pop passes could be a problem?
Yeah, I think so. I think if the Vikings decide that they need to blitz a lot, then that'll probably be the worst case scenario for them, because I think that plays into the strengths of the Eagles' passing game the most.
Right.
And finally, a question submitted oddly by the Wide Left podcast. Why did 19 Democrats vote yes on the new FISA bill?
Ben, you asked this. You might as well answer it.
I feel like you were.
It's very bad.
Throwing a softball to yourself.
I pitched a softball to myself.
The old mailbag fungo.
Yeah, but don't give expanded governing power to the person that you think is evil. That's just a life lesson, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, but that it's like the
Democrats
unstoppable
shooting themselves
force
in the foot since forever.
Yeah, no, forever.
Unstoppable force in the immovable object. Like, sure, the guy might be like evil and potentially demented, and that's like
wow. Okay, we
bad.
have a psychopath authoritarian, so we should give him warrantless surveillance power.
But
obviously,
see, that's the thing. When does any government ever vote for themselves to have less power?
That's true.
That's just an unfortunate truism of like literally every country in the world. Like when it's like if you just like walk past like a thing of cake or donuts in the office. Like, why would you do that? Obviously, you stop and pick up a donut. It's just
I don't like cake.
Can't help yourself.
God damn it, Ben.
You know, I knew I was like, I'm going to pick something, and he's going to be contrarian about it.
I like donuts.
Great.
There you go.
Wow, but that's the bars. The thing you're giving yourself gold stars for doing what's expected of you, like liking good things.
Yeah.
I think that
you don't like Santa.
If I had to choose between
punch horses in the face, you hate cake. Good band, by the way.
I was traumatized by horses and Santa from a very young age. So, well, I wasn't traumatized by Santa, but I'm Jewish.
Speaks to your character, I think.
Fair enough.
All right. That's going to do it for this episode of Norse Code. Ben, do you have anything that you would care to plug other than Wide Left?
Yeah, if you want to go ahead and follow the Wide Left podcast for Arif and I's incredibly agreeable political takes, you should, and not at all divisive. You should go ahead and do that. But if the Eagles season ends on Sunday, then I will be doing a lot of draft coverage. And here's a fun little nugget. I pre-prepared draft coverage for this week because I had that little faith in the Eagles beating the Falcons.
So you can just hit publish on Monday then.
I have to edit some stuff, but yes, I do. I have like 4 days of draft stuff. So
all right.
So go ahead and follow the Ben Natan on Twitter, TheBenNatan, for draft coverage and political-oriented meltdowns on a daily basis.
Oh, you can do the Mickey Mouse on TheBenNatan. Oh, that's perfect.
Oh, that's perfect. My parents thought of that when they named me.
Yeah, they thought of
They named you V? Well, all right. Arif, anything that your readers should know about? I mean, I think we all know what your listeners need to know about.
Yeah, I mean, I'll probably write about this Eagles matchup. That seems appropriate.
Oh, yeah.
And final note, I missed a few people that are attempting to win one of our 3 Minnesota Vikings newsprint editions, 2 Pioneer Press and 1 Star Tribune. Kyle Slaby, Hunter Vike, Manuel Nadarro, Damian Barrett, Michael O'Brien, and Tyler Dyke are all in the running. So add your name to the hat by making a one-time contribution to the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings at paypal.me/Norse Code, or you can become a recurring monthly contributor by going to patreon.com/Norse Code. But the drawing is for PayPal donations only. So head on over to our tip jar and throw us a few bucks and get yourself potentially a piece of irreplaceable Vikings memorabilia. We will return next week with a recap of the Eagles game, and hopefully it'll be another victory lap. I don't know if we'll. Ben has already told us that we will not get another miracle, so there won't be. The
Vikings are going to win on a Hail Mary on Sunday, and I'm going to be absolutely sick. So
we'll be sure to have you on in that case so we can point and laugh.
Yes, of course.
But until then, demand excellence. Demand Norse Code. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music Podcasts, or wherever else fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan, who can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. Our intrepid producer and occasional co-host James Pagachnik can be found on Twitter at Big Mono or curating the official Norse Code Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN. I'm your host with a firm grasp of the obvious, Dusty O'Connell, and my name is my handle on Twitter. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, your one-time donation can be made at paypal.me/NorseCode, or a recurring monthly contribution can be made by visiting patreon.com/NorseCode. Please visit our website, norsecodepodcast.com, where you'll find links to our Facebook and YouTube pages, along with the episode archive and some other good stuff. And any questions or comments that won't fit in a tweet can be emailed to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. And on behalf of the entire Norse Code staff, thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this. We go out people hit people in the mouth.